I'm here in front of the Flatirons in Boulder, Colorado. These Flatirons are just one example of Colorado's many beautiful outdoor landscapes. From towering 14ers and pristine alpine lakes to rushing canyon rivers and extensive mountain forests, Colorado has it all. Yet every year, these amazing ecosystems become more threatened by droughts, wildfires, overdevelopment, air and water pollution, invasive species, and loss of biodiversity. I think everyone knows at this point that this past winter was one of the driest and warmest in recorded history. So me and my buddy Noah wanted to go out and see what people and organizations are actually doing to combat these environmental threats. And what better place to start than a volunteer organization that mixes two of Boulder's most classic niches, environmental conservation and rock climbing.
I'm Aaron Friedland. I work for the Boulder climbing community. I'm the operations and volunteer coordinator, as well as I head up the eagle monitoring program, the wag bag program, and I help out with our rebolting efforts. We're here in Boulder Canyon, specifically at Animal World climbing area, looking out across the canyon over at Vampire Rock, which is where our resident peregrine falcons have made their home since 2025. This is part of the eagle monitoring program, or more accurately, the raptor monitoring program. We kind of keep an eye on where golden eagles, peregrine falcons, and other cliff-dwelling raptors nest in the canyon. There are closures associated with, nesting locations for those species, and we help out by keeping an eye on the nesting locations, seeing what nests are active. Our volunteers do that by coming up to our various observation points throughout the canyon. We have a nice spotting scope and binoculars that we providing updates on the development of chicks, laying of eggs, and eventual fledglings of the young. And we pass that along to the Forest Service in Boulder Canyon and the Park Service up in Rocky Mountain so that they can make informed decisions about the closures and trying to avoid blanket closures, having them be more targeted to still protect the nesting areas of the raptors while allowing for recreation to continue in those areas as much as possible. The BCC is a nonprofit or stewardship organization, so we're focused on maintaining and improving our local climbing areas and public lands. We do everything from sustainable trail building. We keep an eye on where raptors are nesting. We replace aging hardware, getting old rusty bolts out of the wall and replacing them with nice stainless steel bolts. And we hand out wag bags, your bathroom in a bag for when the coffee kicks in at the wrong time to keep our crags and watersheds clean. The mission of the BCC is to maintain and improve our local climbing areas. We want to be good stewards to the land that we recreate on. So the BCC is made up of 3 full-time employees and then a whole swath of volunteers, who help out in every aspect of our programming. We have over 1,000 volunteers that have helped us out. So we have a big climber presence in Boulder and the Front Range in general. So we have a lot of community engagement in that regard, people willing to help out and lend a hand in, pretty much every aspect of what we're out here doing. Unfortunately, we still have, people climb closed areas every so often. So, if you are someone who is passionate about the conservation of the birds and, protecting their ability to fledge their young, your project will be there once the crag reopens. It's only a few months out of the year that these areas are closed, and spreading the word, to your friends, your climbing partners, your mortal enemies, anyone who it might be, just to help get the word out so that, everyone knows that there is these closures, they're there for a reason. Land managers take this seriously, and if there is documentation of an incursion, you can be looking at monetary or, significant time off of your plan. If you think avoiding climbing because of a bird is bad, being in that got dark. Being in a jail cell is way worse than voluntarily climbing somewhere else.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll do extra work to check up on the raptors in the canyon. Lead poisoning is a concern for raptors because of hunting, with lead buckshot in animals that they prey upon. They can end up ingesting those. We were curious to see if that was an issue in this population, so we ended up rappelling into the Eagle Rock nest with a metal detector to scan the nest to see if there was any, leftover lead fragments from their scat or leftover animal carcasses that were there. And luckily, after scanning the entire nest thoroughly, we didn't pick up any hints of metals. So at least, at this point, it doesn't look like that's a concern for the pair in Boulder Canyon. There's a lot of different ways that people can, be a good steward of, the outdoors, public lands, climbing areas. If you want to get involved with BCC, pretty much everything we do is a volunteer opportunity. If you want to help out on trails, you can help out our trail team. We'll train you how to replace bolts. If you want to spy on birds and help us keep an eye on where the raptors are nesting, get involved in the eagle monitoring program. Also, if you like, clean crags, we have our wag bag program. It's essentially a hike with an extra stop along the way. We have cache points throughout, Boulder, Golden, even down in Staunton State Park, where you can pick up bags and help restock our trailside stations. And beyond that, every day, you're out climbing, you can be a good steward by making sure that you're packing things in and packing it out. If you see trash laying around, tossing it in your bag and carrying it out. So there's lots of things on a micro level that you can just do in your everyday, outdoor activities that, benefit the whole, outdoor community that, Boulder is so proud of having.
After hearing about BCC and getting to see some peregrine falcons right up the road in Boulder Canyon, we wanted to go out and see what was being done in other areas of Colorado. So we reached out to Colorado Open Lands and got to hear all about their Riparian Reconnect program from Ryan Holt.
I am Ryan Holt, and I'm a restoration coordinator for Colorado Open Lands. So in short, I help plan, permit, and implement restoration projects on public and private lands in Grand and Jackson counties. Colorado Open Lands, we're a nonprofit land trust that exists to protect open space, water, agricultural, and wildlife habitat forever. I primarily work within COL's Riparian Reconnect program, which focuses on reconnecting riverscapes and Colorado headwaters. So this includes promoting things like wood accumulation, floodplain reconnection, stream meanders, sediment deposition, and groundwater recharge. And at the heart of this, a key part of this work is partnering with beavers, obvious keystone species that have historically been removed from many of Colorado's headwater streams. So by improving habitat and using tools like beaver dam analogs and post-assisted log structures, we can mimic beaver activity and help make conditions right for beavers to return and maintain the system naturally.
Letting nature do the work itself, and just facilitating that versus trying to manhandle and do everything ourselves.
It's way more cost effective than constantly trying to slap a Band-Aid on things, let nature do the work.
For your project specifically, who's working on these things?
We try to get scientists, conservationists, restoration practitioners, government officials. We try to get everybody involved, private landowners, people who are actually out on the land every single day, to come together and diagnose, but then just figure out the next step forward on how we can improve these systems. But there's a whole lot of preparation and relationship building that goes into these projects before you can actually get out on the ground and, get muddy. It takes a lot to come into someone's, private ranch, maybe it's multi-generational, and, ask to potentially change how that looks for them. That relationship building is really key.
Yeah, that was something I was kind of talking about with how much behind the scenes work is actually going on that people don't realize, with these projects.
Yeah, it's not glamorous, but it is important.
So why does this mission matter to the general public?
It does matter to the general public because it's, where all of our food comes from. It's where a lot of our livelihoods come from. It's where we go to recreate. So these projects help improve water quality. They store water in the landscape. They reduce flooding, and they increase drought resilience. They also create healthier habitat for fish and wildlife and improve the long-term sustainability of working lands like ranches.
With the, kind of lack of winter, I feel like we had this year, do you foresee that being pretty troublesome this summer?
It's hard to say anything but that. This is why this work is important. It's huge for wildfire resilience. By holding on to the water longer in these systems, and that's created pool habitat in these beaver wetlands, you have these more stable base flows. So later in the season, we're going to have these slower releases. It's still going to be really tough, but with these, restored wetlands, it makes it a little bit easier. You see these very stark photos of, a completely crisp, blackened landscape and then there's this like ribbon of green where these intact wetlands are, and it's, you know, safe space for plants and animals and just the natural communities that it's far easier to rebuild from if you have those refugias.
In your opinion, like what can people do to get involved either with Colorado Open Lands or sort of just conservation in general?
So just to plug us, people can support Colorado Open Lands by engaging with us on our website or our social media, where we post about our community and outreach events. But more broadly, getting involved can mean learning about local ecosystems, you know, supporting conservation organizations wherever you find them, participating in community science, or, you know, just simply paying attention to how land and water are managed where you live. You don't need to work in conservation to make a difference. You know, awareness, stewardship of your, you know, local area, and even curiosity go a long way.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. See you, Jack.
Unfortunately, due to logistical constraints, we weren't able to visit Ryan and see his projects in person. But knowing our project wouldn't be complete without getting in the field ourselves, we decided to look more locally for ways to get our hands dirty. So after reaching out to the folks at Wildlands Restoration Volunteers, we were able to spend a Saturday volunteering in our own backyard, the Boulder foothills.
My name's Zoe. I'm the volunteer with WRV. Today we're removing invasive plants. So this is myrtle spurge.
Myrtle spurge is an invasive that was used for ornamental planting in 60s and 70s. And now it's spreading to the point where it's problematic for native plants. None of the native herbivores eat it, and it's just nasty. So we're getting rid of it.
Something you have to be careful with, apparently, with the myrtle spurge is the sap is super toxic. So apparently it can even cause blindness if you get it in your eyes. That's why we're wearing these thick chemical resistant gloves.
Plants serve this important role as, you know, they take energy from the sun and they convert it into sugars and other things that the rest of the ecosystem can use. So if plants can't be eaten by anything, bugs, mammals, anything, then it's sort of the end of the line for all that energy. And they're taking up space where our native plants, which do contribute to the ecosystem, now can't grow because they're shaded out, covered up. There's so many things in this world that you can do that are good things to do, but you don't see any impact from what you're doing. Whereas if you spend all day on one of these projects, you make a huge visible difference in your local ecosystem.
I'm Morgan Crowley. I'm a program director with Wildlands Restoration Volunteers. We are a nonprofit organization that was founded in 1999. Our mission is sort of twofold. We work both in building a community of volunteers and then having that community go out and do restoration on the landscape. And we do everything from native seed collections out on the prairie to get seeds that are not commercially available, which are very helpful for restoration projects. We do noxious weed removals. We do high alpine road closure and revegetation. We've been working up on Summit Lake on Mount Blue Sky for more than 10 years now, doing restoration in the alpine. And trail work and youth and family engagement. We have a whole program and 3 now bilingual staff who engage the Latinx community in restoration. And that can be anything from like planting trees in urban parks to weed removals and trash cleanups and a little bit of everything in between. So a lot of our funding comes from grants that we apply for. So many of our staff are grant writers as well. We'll apply for foundation grants or private grants or government grants. Less federal grants this year, unfortunately. Those have been scaled back a bit. We also do work that we call fee for service. So the Forest Service or Boulder County might hire us to do certain work. The work that we were doing here today, for example, we work with a grant from Boulder County to reach out to private homeowners so that we can remove noxious weeds that would infest public lands if they weren't managed. So, and then we also have donors as well, and donors are hugely important for our work because donor funding is what we call unrestricted. You know, most people want to know that their funding is going towards organizations that don't have a lot of overhead. But what I think a lot of people fail to realize is that overhead is what pays for staff to organize the volunteers, to have our trucks and porta potties out here and pay for tools and all of those things. So the donor funding is like the gold because it's usually unrestricted. Anybody who's paying attention to the news these days sees there's no end of need for restoration of lands that have been damaged or conservation of lands that are still in good shape. We need our public lands. We need pristine, wild areas in order to support wildlife and pollinators and the trees that clean the air that we breathe and clean the water that we drink. So we need these lands to be in good shape. Having some way to get involved and while you're doing that, build community and meet like-minded folks, not only, lets people have the opportunity to do something that is helpful for the lands that we all know and love, especially here in Colorado. Our lands get a little too loved sometimes. It also gives people hope, and it gives people a sense that they're making a difference and they're doing something, and that is something that everybody needs these days. Yeah, to find out about WRV's volunteer opportunities, and there are other organizations like us as well throughout the state doing stewardship work if you're not close to the Front Range where most of our work is, but you can just go to wrv.org, and we have a volunteer calendar that's up there. There's like almost 250 volunteer opportunities every year at this point, so there is something that will fit everybody's schedule, from a few hours in the evening collecting native seed to 4 days in the backcountry moving rocks and doing erosion control for sage grouse habitat restoration. We have something for everyone.
It turns out that Zoe was absolutely right about the satisfaction of seeing how much can be done just from one day's hard work. Since our volunteering had taken place right in people's backyards, we wanted to explore further how private land is involved in conservation efforts. For this, we reached out to Keep It Colorado, an organization that specializes in the sometimes overlooked work of private land conservation.
So Robin Palikas and I am the executive director of Keep It Colorado. We have about 40 or 50 members, and it's all different organizations. And the shared mission is to focus on private land conservation in Colorado. I think it's important to note that we are not the ones working with landowners to conserve properties. You can kind of think of it as there's the folks that are on the front line of conservation, and then we're kind of more behind the scenes, adding support and capacity. Private land is really important because 60% of the state is covered in private land. And so if we're thinking about landscape connectivity and wildlife corridors, watershed health, or keeping water on landscapes, or habitat, all of those things are going to benefit if there's this partnership between public lands and private lands that really kind of fills in the gaps of public land and makes it so there's like a mosaic of conservation that can be really impactful and sort of disproportionately impactful. Conservation funding is a really big topic. Colorado has a really neat statewide tax credit that incentivizes conservation easements. And so if an individual landowner donates a conservation easement, they can qualify for a transferable tax credit that helps with their state income tax, or they can sell it to somebody that can utilize it. And it really helps conservation go to scale. And it really does support a wide range of projects from the San Luis Valley. We had a meeting out there. We were talking with local landowners that were emphasizing that the tax credit had helped keep some of the local ag supply stores in business. So it kept this vibrant ag community that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise. And then it also can support projects like outdoor recreation access that otherwise might not be doable. We have a great partnership with Great Outdoors Colorado, which is the agency that administers lottery funds. They every year give $1 million to Keep It Colorado to re-grant to our members. And it's just such a great partnership because it really is a way that Keep It Colorado is able to help get some conservation projects up off the ground that wouldn't otherwise. We really are bringing together the policymakers with the folks that are benefiting from the policies. And we did 2 legislative tours this fall that I think are great examples of this. One of them was in Eagle County, and it was to a conserved property that's done in partnership with the Eagle Valley Land Trust and Eagle County Open Space Organization. They had outdoor recreation trails. In the valley bottoms, they also leased out grazing land, and so there was a multi-generational longtime ranch family that was able to graze cows there. And then they were trying different restoration projects on parts of it. And they also had some seasonal wildlife closures. So it was so cool to be there in the field with policymakers that had set up the incentives that made all of this happen, but also with the landowners themselves that were benefiting from the ability to keep cows on the land, and then some of the managers that were making these really thoughtful decisions about restoration projects and when and where different trails should be open to manage for the environmental values. Brought this so you can see it. We worked for many years to come up with this roadmap. So it was released in 2023. It's called the Conserving Colorado 10-Year Roadmap for the Future of Private Land Conservation. And it's great because it is the community's shared vision of what private land conservation could look like over the next decade. It sets some really ambitious goals like doubling acres conserved, doubling communities engaged, and doubling resources for conservation. And I think it sets kind of a North Star for all of the organizations that have to be part of this work to kind of pull in the same direction. It's so that it's not individual acts of conservation. It ends up being sort of a mosaic of different projects that contribute to the state's success. It's always great to look up your local organization. A lot of times they'll have movie nights, they'll have volunteer days. I think getting involved in some of those local organizations can make this kind of abstract concept feel really tangible and direct. I also think it's really great if folks start to track and understand policy. I love state policy. It's super accessible compared to federal policy. And so I would encourage folks to, read some of the trusted news sources that do a good job of summarizing it, but then don't hesitate to reach out to your legislators and express support for bills that you think seem like they might be a good idea and make a good impact. A lot of times all it takes is a couple people raising an issue or supporting a bill or opposing a bill, depending on the circumstances, and it can really make a big difference.
One theme that really stood out from speaking with Robin is just how multidisciplinary conservation work is. All the organizations that we got to meet with vary greatly in scale and structure, yet they all have one thing in common. The people involved all share a passion for their work. Whether they've been working in conservation for 30 plus years or just spent a few hours of their weekends volunteering, every person we met with shared the same deep interest in protecting our environment. Every healthy ecosystem is made up of varying biotic organisms, abiotic processes, all interconnected and serving their own unique purpose. The health of the ecosystem depends on this interconnectedness and diversity. And the same seems to be true for the conservation of these systems. From career biologists to rock climbers, and from policy specialists to weekend volunteers, everybody plays a necessary part in protecting the beautiful and important natural landscapes that we all love so much.